Hello and welcome. My name is Sarah Seidelman and I am hosting this series which I call the Hummingbird series because I'm visiting with lots of amazing humans that I think are just doing a lot of great work, and I want you to meet them and hope that what they're sharing maybe somehow will help you. And I know they've helped me because they're fantastic. So I want to introduce to you Jessica Waite, who is here with me today. And I met her. She and I have a common love affair that we both love Martha Beck, and she has taken her Write into Light course, which if you're a writer, definitely check that out. And Jessica has this beautiful website that she's created called endlessstories.love. And she's inviting people to tell their stories of loss. And I'm going to just let Jessica explain a little bit more, but I love what she's up to and I hope that you'll check it out. So welcome, Jessica.
Oh, thanks, Sarah. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. So I'll tell you a little bit about, I guess, myself and my loss first, and then how the site kind of came into being. So my husband, Sean, passed away really suddenly of a heart attack in November of 2015. And he was on a business trip to Houston that was supposed to be 2 days. So he was on his way. He just dropped off his rental car and he phoned me from the shuttle to the terminal, and then it was see you soon. And then he didn't get off the flight. So it was really a sudden and traumatic loss. Not too long after the funeral, I was really lucky that I was able to attend a conference with Dr. Alan Wolfelt, who's a grief expert. And I took one huge thing away from the presentation that he gave, which was, he differentiated between grief and mourning. And grief, I think we all know what that is that gaping hole in your life when you lose someone that you love. And that mourning is the process of externalizing that and sort of getting it out of your body and turning it into something else. And so he said, you can talk it out, you can write it out, you can dance, garden, whatever you do to process that. But he said, time doesn't heal. If you don't mourn your loss, you will grieve for the rest of your life. And it's like being dead while you're still alive. And and so I felt that it was so true to me. And it was so true that I could almost see like a parade of people that I knew who had tried to go around it and who had tried, you say like they never got over the loss of their mother. You probably know people like that in your own life too. And I'm like, that's not going to be me. Like, I don't think I actually did this, but I felt like grabbing the hands of the people beside me and we're going through, we're not going to let that happen to us, like this, to continue to feel this way for the rest of our lives. And so, I know that the way that you kind of try and skirt it is through numbing. Like I have a lot of people in my family with, addiction issues and that sort of thing. And so I knew that I couldn't go that route, that if I did that, that's where that was going to trap me on the outside. And so what I kind of did was just gave myself permission to do, without numbing, whatever else I could that would feel good and try everything to try. And so the things that helped me were, finding other people that were in my situation, and so that I didn't feel so alone, because grief is so isolating. And then radical self-care, which is another concept, is just like doing, like getting massage, or like having, like I'd go and get my hair cut. It was just nice to have someone touch you. It helps you feel less lonely. So that's the kind of thing. And then writing was humongous for me in terms of processing the loss. And then when I did Write into Light, Martha said something that she says lots of things. Yeah. But she said, anything that you've ever read that has made you feel less alone or feel supported or feel inspired is only there because someone wrote it down and put it into the world. And so to me, I don't know if you, there's lots of things about transforming through grief. And I remember sitting at home just being shattered and being like, if I knew what I was supposed to transform into, it would be so much easier. But when I did the writing and the idea of sharing, and when I got over the fear of sharing, I realized that process of sharing is the transformation, because it goes from being like it's putting it out and it's letting your experience be relatable to someone else. And so that those things, that kind of path about not wanting to be alone and wanting to share was the seeds of, of the idea for the website. And then should I just keep going?
Oh yes, I am in rapt attention.
Okay.
I'm just listening.
Okay. And then last summer I went to a birthday party for my brother-in-law. And so my husband was the youngest of 6 kids, and most of his family was there and their spouses. And at the end of the party, my brother-in-law started, he just thanked everyone for coming and what a nice time it was. And then he started telling this story about this snowball fight back at Queen's University. And it was a massive snowball fight. And then everybody went to the pub after, and he met Erin, who's his wife now, and they were getting to know each other. And it was this brother-in-law, he's a great guy, but he's an engineer and usually a little bit, you know, stoic around emotions. And he was so sentimental, and it was heartwarming. And so everybody just started telling the story of how they met and fell in love with their partner. And I've been related to all of these people for 20 years, and I had not heard most of these stories. And I was sitting there listening and kind of glowing in the warmth of it, and then thinking about what I was going to say. And then everybody went around, and it would have been my turn, but the birthday cake came in, and we were all singing happy birthday. And then as we were singing, something just clicked in my mind, and I was like, holy cow, I am so lucky that this interruption happened, because I don't think they were going to ask me, because it was such a nice moment, and they didn't want to make me feel awkward or kind of ruin the vibe if I started crying.
Agreed.
And,
Yeah.
and I'm like, these are the people who love me the most. They loved my husband the most because they're his family. And if they're not going to ask me to tell, then no one's ever going to ask me to share my love story again. And I really wanted to share. And so I started thinking about how could I make it easier for people to ask, or easier for people to talk about it. And because it was horrible to me, the idea that a treasured memory can become a taboo topic, and that you could be excluded from a conversation because talking about your loved one brings awkwardness in. And so I didn't want that to happen. I wanted people to have a place where they could tell, like, share their happy memories, not just the grief and loss stories, but the joy and happy stories. And kind of, you know, grief drowns that stuff out really badly. And so I wanted to just crank up the volume on the happy things, because they matter so much. And if we don't call them back up, you know, we're going to lose them. Like, you have to access your memories in order to keep them, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's so beautiful. I was shown once in a ceremony, like, also how sad it is to be forgotten, you know, by our ancestors, like our grandmas and our grandpas, and of course people who are anybody that we've lost. And so how important it is to remember them, and to do it in a way I would imagine that they would want to be remembered, you know, in these beautiful ways. And of course the film Coco, I just saw that 2 weeks ago with one of my kids, and I mean, we were just both just crying, and it's so beautiful, like how that culture remembers people, and I think how healing and wonderful it is.
I totally agree. I haven't seen Coco yet, but I lived in Asia for 5 years. And so the difference in how the Japanese or, you know, Chinese people honor their ancestors is huge. And so it's, again, other cultures do a better job than our culture. And it's ironic, right? Because one of our biggest fears, if we're dying, is that we'll be forgotten. And yet we're afraid to talk about our people that have died. And so that's the quickest way to forgetting. So I think we need to do a better job of helping each other with bringing.
Yeah. And it's really, maybe it's a service we do for each other to remind each other that when we die, we go, but all of our good actions, all of our, you know, those are the only things we really leave behind. And when people remember us, and we remember others, like that's remembering all those beautiful actions that they took. Or the silly things, you know. I remember a good friend of ours died in a suicide, so kind of a traumatic, really different from somebody who dies at a ripe old age and maybe is ready to go. Also sad, but more traumatic, like very sudden and unexpected in his case. And I remember the year after, we sat around and somebody brought up this golf cart that he had, and just the crazy things that he would do with this golf cart. And then in that inspired, lots of golf cart stories started coming out, and it was just so wonderful because we were all laughing. And I just thought, yeah, that's the kind of remembering that we need to do.
Yes, I could not agree more. And especially with suicide, because there's such a stigma. And for sometimes, depending on people's religious tradition, they're not even allowed to have a funeral. And then people are so like, it's really magnified. And so I think but that process of remembering the person, the whole person, and yeah, it's so important and awesome. So yeah.
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 And you shared how, Jessica just shared recently how she unopened a box in the garage, and in the box, a year after her husband's death, or approximately, then she found this book of memories that his office had mailed to her and got to read. And I think for us as people trying to help somebody who is in a mourning process, in a grieving process, and a mourning process, is to not hesitate to send that text. Hey, I thought of your loved one today, and I remembered this, because, and it makes me just cry thinking about it, but because we need to remember.
Yeah.
So
much. And I'm sure you probably you've read Big Magic, or Liz's idea about creativity, like the ideas that ping you. And I'm like, I think now, like, what if our loved ones are pinging us, and that's why we remember those things randomly? And it's like that we need to like engage with it when it happens, and just take some action, write it down.
Don't hold back. Like, even if you're worried it's going to, I guess, yeah, I know there's sometimes, like, on this website that Jessica has, she has this invitation that you can tell your story. And you talk about the fact that sometimes on Facebook, like a Facebook memory will pop up, and kind of like, you just end up like crushed by a wave of grief that you didn't even see coming, and that can be really painful. So I guess maybe we should be thoughtful when we share whatever we share. But I think a lot of times those sweet memories, gosh, they're there because they're bubbling up for a reason.
Yeah, that's true. And I guess, like, when someone, if they're in the immediate aftermath of a loss, you might not want to be like, oh, that time, because maybe they're not receptive then. But definitely as time passes, I think that will become more and more welcome. And I don't know, everybody, grief, it's such a process, and the waves, and you don't know when they're going to hit. And but the idea that we have to kind of tiptoe around that, like, they come when they come. And so someone mentioning Sean's name isn't gonna, I don't know, for me, even at that time, the harder things for me, and it's interesting, is people won't ask you, like, talk about them, but they will ask you, how did they die? What happened to them? Like, people aren't shy about that question. And like, then you end up having to kind of relive a trauma over and over and over, explaining, which I'm not saying, don't ask, but it's interesting, because I think people ask that maybe because they're curious, and they want to know what to look over their shoulder for.
I think it's fear, right? Because if it's something that we want to reassure ourselves we're okay, I think that's why people ask those questions.
Yeah. But it's for the person. Like, I had, I don't know, the receptionist from my dentist's office phoned me the day after the obituary went into the paper, and she's like, oh, I'm so sorry. What happened? And I was like, oh, I didn't like that. So anyway, I would advise against that.
Right. Things but not to say.
Asking about how they lived. Tell me about them. That's the kind of questions that I think are helpful to someone who's lost their person.
Beautiful. Yeah. So Jessica, tell us where we can find you. And then also, like, I would love for you to share an invitation, because I think your invitation is really beautiful to share stories, because I'm a firm believer, like, when we share our heartfelt story, maybe our own, Martha Beck calls it a hell and back. Like, where have you gotten through, and what did you learn from it? Or just sharing, something special about a loved one that you've lost, so that it lives on somewhere, and that somebody else can hear that and find themselves in that piece of writing. So can you talk a little bit about your invitation and where to find where you are?
Okay, sure. So the website is www.endlessstories.love. And so if you go there, there's always 3 stories that are accessible to the public to view. So they're the 3 most recent stories that have come in. And then if you register, you can see the rest of the stories. And there are all kinds of different stories, different relationships, and anyone that you loved and lost, you're welcome to share anything about them. So a happy story, what happened, the griefs, like anything that you want is okay. And the writing doesn't matter. That's, I think, that people's number one hurdle is feeling like it's not good enough or people are going to judge your writing. The spelling, grammar, none of that matters. All that matters is like your person is so important that please don't let that be a barrier. I
Yeah.
remember
And
when
I loved reading some of the very simple pieces because they were so not like sometimes we read things where we know somebody like labored over every word and got out the thesaurus, Lord, all that kind of stuff. And it's like sometimes it's so refreshing to read something so real and so just straight from the heart.
Yes, I completely agree. And I was really lucky that I got interviewed on the radio about my website on the day that it launched, and my grief counselor heard the interview. And so she, the next day, sent me her story about her mom. And because she understands the process, the healing power of stories, all of that, her story it was just a few lines, but it was right, it was right to the heart. And I'm like, it's such a good example. If somebody I mean, they're all good. And I'm not singling this out as a favorite, but for people who you don't have to encapsulate every single thing about the person or how much you love them. That's too huge of a job, and it's you can't. I can't comprehend the idea of trying to do that, but yeah, it can be really something simple, and just as long as it's from your heart, it's good enough. So anyway, so about, you can read the stories first. You have to register, but it's free, and I think it's fairly easy. And I wish that people didn't have to register, but I think in order to keep it compassionate and to keep
Yeah.
the bad internet people out, that's just something that you have to do. And then all the stories are in there, so you can read, and if it feels right to you, then please share a story. So that it's, again, I think reasonably straightforward, but if people are having any problem, you can email me through the website and I'll help step you through, because I don't want any technical glitches to stop anybody from being able to share.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jessica, for being here, and sending you many blessings on on your beautiful work. Thank you for doing it.
Thanks so much for having me, Sarah. Bye.
Bye.